Good morning and welcome to the South African Board for Sheriffs Masterclass in Debt Collection. One of the key mandates of the South African Board for Sheriffs is to ensure that sheriffs are kept abreast with the continuing developments of rules and regulations affecting the role of sheriffs. The continuous identification of training needs for sheriffs is of paramount importance and front of mind to the board. I am Jodie van Wyk, the Executive Manager for the South African Board for Sheriffs, and once again wish to say a very warm welcome to all our participants today. Due to the impact of COVID-19, the board has had to shift its training engagements with sheriffs from face-to-face engagements, so class engagements, to a training format on a virtual platform. For this reason, we have conducted a range of virtual masterclasses over the last few months. The rationale for this masterclass is that sheriffs would maximize their income if they are running their accounting books in a systemized way. In the same vein, we are confident that if sheriffs have an appropriate debt management system in place, such a system would in turn ensure that they will have control over their cash flow, business account, and trust accounts. The content of this course today should be read in conjunction with Section 36 and 37 of the Sheriffs Act, where we are speaking of the Fidelity Fund and Code of Conduct, and more particularly looking at fiduciary duties, as well as financial affairs of sheriffs. So what is this course about today? The Debtors Management Masterclass will focus on laws and regulations governing effective control of debtors and creditors, an understanding of debtors management, preparation of effective debt collection, debtors and analysis and debtors tools, important systems, instruments, and documents in relation to debtors management, best practices in effective control of credit and collection techniques, debtor and creditor relationship in terms of rights and duties. Given the importance of the subject, the board sourced an expert on debt management. Our training provider for this masterclass, BSI Experience Skills Training, led by Sensei Ndlovu, our very knowledgeable and experienced facilitator for today, will provide us with the fundamental skills and systems of debt management. Let's tell you a little bit about Sensei. Sensei Ndlovu has worked as a corporate leadership facilitator, assessor, and coach to top South African and international organizations, including collaborating to improve alignment within cross-functional teams and including senior and executive levels. He is an experienced and results-driven ETDP professional with over 12 years professional practice in the learner and development fraternity and 9 years in the contact center, debt recovery, and customer service industry. So clearly, Sensei comes with a lot of experience. He has worked with professionals at all levels within a broad range of industries and organizations, which include and are not limited to the financial sector, national investment banks, MTN Ghana, the Teachers Fund, BP, Woolworths, Toys R Us, and a lot more. In order to ensure the smooth running of the program today and to guarantee that your questions are addressed, I also wish to welcome Mr. Andrew Nkumisi, Sheriff from the Paarl District, as our moderator for today. Please ensure that you utilize the chat box to direct any questions you may have to him and or the team. Alongside him, supporting us is our IT virtual platform team, Ash and Chris, our training committee, as well as staff of the board. A very special welcome to the most important participants today, you, the sheriffs, your deputies, and your staff. Please sit back and enjoy the session.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Masterclass of Data Management. I firstly want to thank Jody for that wonderful intro. Thank you very much, Jody, and these very kind words. My name is Sensei Ndlovu, and I would like to welcome you all for coming today to this session. I'm very fascinated by numbers and data analytics. I hold a master's degree in strategic management and a qualification on the NQF level 6 in the education, training, and development. So I have worked for over a number of years within the space of learning and development, over 12 years, but more specifically, about 9 years when it comes to the debt recovery, when it comes to the customer services industry, as well as a contact center. Now, it's been amazing that as a consultant, I have had an amazing opportunity to be able to work with different professionals at different levels as well. And just by working and living in different places, that has come to prove that that is not a uniquely South African thing. So what I have done as an initial thing is kind of just to get an infographic from the IMF to show that debt on a global scale before we come down to be able to work with this. So what I'd like to do now is to do a very beginning of that and just to show you quickly. So thank you and welcome again. Have a look at the infographic that depicts every part as a percentage of the world. So when you're looking at this top 5, we can see that United States has got number 1 ranking, which is almost a third of the percentage of the world debt when it comes to debt to GDP. So they hold 31%. And then you have Japan that follows. So just between Japan and US alone, they're almost 50% of the world debt. And then you have China and then Italy. And then I've taken about 5 or top 5 rather to have a look at the ranking. But there are 196 countries around the world that have been put down here to show in terms of what they actually, where they fit in. Now, where do we fit in South Africa? In South Africa, we're currently on number 33 or ranked number 33, and our percentage of debt to GDP sits at 0.3%. Now, these stats are obviously not 2021 stats, they're from last year. And you can see that the IMF came up with this to be able to show about where does actually money versus the GDP comes from, or what does it really happen when the country is obviously in terms of the world debt as well. So earlier on, we spoke briefly, you saw on the video about what you're going to try and cover, but I want us just to have a look at the learning map for today. Now we can agree that the session is not a 2-day or a 3-day session. So it covers on a very high level. And I think a lot of it as well, you can also agree with me that it should be very much be a reminder to a lot of stuff that you know. That is like, oh, right, I remember this and that. So let's start very quickly. So our first part will look at the financial management, about what do we mean by that? What is financial management? Because even though that we're working as sheriffs, we're working as collectors, as debt collectors, but we need to understand about how does it impact and where do we start with understanding the financial management as a whole, as a business, as well as an individual as well. And number 2, we're going to look at the good collection practices. What are the things sometimes that could be your own hurdles, your own stumbling blocks that might stop you from being able to be successful in doing whatever you do as well? And a lot of it, you'll be surprised that even though we might have a lot of the resources and have an amazing space, but it all boils down to you as a person in terms of how you deal and how you work with people. So we're going to look at the legislation governing the debt collection. We're then going to look at the importance of Section 36 and 37, as has been alluded by Jody earlier on as well. And we're going to look at the code of conduct quite specifically of the sheriffs. And then we're going to look at the code of conduct of the debt collectors. Because even though that, and just to have a look at the similarities, what are the similarities between the code of conduct of the sheriffs from the Sheriff's Act, as well as the Code of Conduct of the Debt Collectors Act. We're then going to look at the methods of debt correspondence, how we correspond, what you do, as a reminder as well. So you'll be, as I said, like a lot of the stuff will be a reminder than a new teaching. So, and then lastly, we're going to look at how do we then handle customers' objections, the off-ramps, and all of that stuff. I think it's quite critical to be able to look at that. Now, once again, is that one would like to spend more time in depth and unpack and interrogate each process, but we have about 2 hours altogether. So whatever maybe some questions you might have a little bit late, just please bring them up as well, and we'll be able to answer that after the session. So what do we mean by financial management? So what I would like to look at quickly is that let's have a look at the stats. So in my intro, I mentioned that I am very fascinated by numbers, by data analytics, and by statistics. So, and I believe that data carries a lot of information, which is very factual as well. So this, once again, is an information that is very statistics driven. So if we say, why will only 8% people become financially independent one day? And this is a fact that in a scope of 100 people, you find that a very small percentage it happens. Now, while we're doing this, even though the drive is to the debtor about how you want to go and collect and get your funds, but I think we need to kind of almost do an introspective of where we are and who we are as well as people before we become kind of sheriffs and debt collectors. Why will the other 92 fail? I think that is a very big question. Why will the other 92 fail? And are they just unlucky, bad with money, or investment, or what? So what I'd like us to do is to answer and look at 100 people, say teenagers at the age of 15, and think about where they'll be 50 years from now, say when they're 65. So we now want to try and break it down. We have 100 people, and you want to see what will happen when they're 65. So the stats tells us that 38 of those people, say in 50 years time, they'll be dead for whatever reason, and there might be different circumstances, but this is just an equation, which is very mathematical and statistics. So 62 of those will be alive, and of those 62 that are alive, 38 will be dead broke, meaning they'll be financially kind of like, they will not have the means, they'll be struggling quite a bit. And then you look at from the 38, we have the 16, they'll be working. So out of those 16 people working, 7 will be retired on a livable income. But then 1 out of all of those people will be a wealthy person. So that means if you're doing the ratio, for every 100 people, or kind of like young teenagers, only 1 person or 2 people are actually able to live wealthily. So the ratio is quite scary to look at that and to try and understand about what is then the reason for that. So of those 100 people, only 8% will reach a financial independence, because we have the 7 that will retire on a livable income. They can continue, but they are not wealthy, but they are able to sustain and live on their lives as well on their own. Now, once again, if we're doing a face-to-face, as we mentioned kind of like before, is that because we're doing virtual, is that, so this will kind of like probe and ask questions to hear your thoughts as well. And hopefully I'll be able to hear that at the end of the training about what are your thoughts? Why do you think that these numbers, change so much? Why are these percentages seem to be almost so kind of like, you have a 92% and 8% only that succeeds in this process. So let's look at the reasons, maybe why will that happen? And then while we're looking at the reasons why this happened, once again, the session for today, it's about the data management. But in order for us to understand what it is and how we manage data, we've got to understand our role that we play as individuals, as human beings, and about also in doing a self-reflection about ourselves. So let's look at this. So 6 reasons why: lack of knowledge. Now you might be surprised that when I say lack of knowledge, it's not because that they are not book educated. It's about the desire and wanting to learn more, wanting to understand, wanting to investigate. That might be a challenge here, most people. You'll find that the people who actually spend time and want to attain and gain more knowledge are the ones who already have got a plan about what they want to try and do with their lives. So it could be that. And the lack of foresight as well. So where you aren't able to see beyond today and tomorrow, the end of the week. And it is true, there might be different, I think, reasons why people might just wanna live from hand to mouth, or kind of like, based on different circumstances. But I think just to begin to think bigger than the end of the week or the end of today, and really kind of visualize and dream bigger than where you are. So poor money management, and sometimes you find that people are earning and they are working, but how they're actually handling their finances sometimes can be the reason why that much, much later, then it become a very big challenge for everybody to really, really being able to live and be in a space of being comfort when they actually retire. And then let's look at the other part. So there are people that says, you know what, I live once. All I want to do, I just want to kind of live now. So if I get the money now, I spend it all. If I get it tomorrow, then it'll be great as well. So that they have that must have it now mentality. I must have it now. I want a brand new car. I want this house. I want that. And then also they getting the things which you can see that they're not really going to be lasting long as a positive investment. So they're borrowing for things that really depreciate. I've already mentioned this, alluded to this above, about that you buy things that in a year or 2 years' time, in terms of the value of those things, you can't even quantify that. And I think it's really important for us to really look at this. Now, I'm putting that there might be 6 reasons, but I'm certain that there might be more. And the last one as well, I think, which is very, very important, is when you have no plan and no goals. Now, it's easier said than done to say, okay, well, I do have a plan. But when you talk about the plan, how do you then make sure that that plan can be concretized? You can actually be able to measure and say, I have a clear goal. And what do you mean by goals? So let's have a look at it quickly here. So it is surprising about how few people have a plan for living. So the majority of people that you come across is that they have a plan for dying. They have a will. They want to kind of sit people down and tell them exactly about when I do kind of like, pass on, I would like you to do ABC. So, but you find that while they're alive, they actually struggle to be able to come up with a clear plan of how they actually want to live their lives. They're actually very good in getting somebody to come and design a will for them to say when they die, they'd like to do that. So here's my take on it, that if you are really serious about becoming well off financially, you will need to master the art of setting goals. Now, you might have had this before, and I'm certain that you have had this before. But goal setting is something that really allows you where you can see clearly where you move from point A to point B with a clear vision as well of what you want to do. So make sure that your goals are smart. What do we mean by that? That they are very specific, that they are measurable, that you can measure, that they are achievable in terms of attainability, that they are relevant to what you want to achieve. You can't just come up with goals and goals, but at the same time, that you know that they are not reachable, that you're not actually going to be able to achieve them. And then other thing which is quite important is about the time bound. So there is a time factor in terms of like, when do I actually want to achieve this goal? By when? If I want to go and make sure that at the end of the year I've done ABC, those are clear goals. Either in the workplace about the target that you have to be able to go to the debtors about how you're going to work with them, or in your own personal space. So I keep on revisiting this idea that even though we need to be able to go out, we need to be able to collect, we need to be able to work with debtors, we need to be able to manage debtors, but it starts by us managing ourselves. Because if we are very clear about how does that impact on the people we deal with, when we are very clear about where we are, we'll see a bit later on as well when we're dealing with it. So let's look at the good collection practices. So we have the skills. Now, it's a combination of your hard skills and it's a combination of soft skills. So your hard skills would be a lot of in terms of understanding your systems, in terms of having like clear accounting packages, to have good resources as well, where you have your space, you have, all the supporting kind of equipment that you need to be able to do your job effectively. But the soft skills, which I believe they are most critical, and sometimes they are overshadowed by me having an amazing office, by me having all the latest technology. But when I begin to communicate, when I begin to go and collect and do stuff, I struggle and I become frustrated and I don't know why. So one part will be to do with time management. Now, I'm certain that for most courses that you've done before, this has always been stressed about why is time management so important. Now, once again, we can delve even deeper in terms of like, what do we mean by that if one had more time, about what does it really mean about time management, and how do you make sure, and how does it make you feel when somebody says, I'll come and meet you at a particular time, and they don't kind of like, they arrive late in the meeting and all of that. So how does it work and how do you try and change it? So number two, so effective communication. So we're looking at effective communication. And why is communication uses a prefix of effectiveness as opposed to just communication? Because if you want your communication to be effective, which means it's positive, which means it has an impact, which means it's also look at what does it become a win-win situation when I then move to my next topic, which is negotiation. It's not just I'm speaking at a person, but I'm speaking with a person. Because when I'm speaking with the data, then they are able to understand about what do I really kind of like. They understand that I have empathy. They understand that I'm putting myself in their shoes in order for me. I'm not just kind of coming to knock and want to bulldoze them. I'm saying to them, I would like you to understand and see the value in you making the payment going forward. So let's look at, and specifically when you're looking at the follow-ups as well. So follow-ups, I think, are quite crucial, because if I say to somebody, right, we've made an arrangement and I'll come back at a particular time or call you in whatever way, or I'll communicate, I'll send an email. Make sure that does happen, because people, they don't only look at what we say, they look at what we do. And if you're going to make promises, but I don't follow up on that or any other part, then it becomes a challenge as a whole. Now, there are elements of communication which are very crucial. We can see here that in this pie chart, we have a 7% that only represent what? Spoken. And then, so the actual words themselves, they actually equal to 7%. But the voice and tone, when you want to go out as a sheriff, when you want to go out as somebody to go and collect, that is very important about how you then kind of being able to do. Now, the biggest part is body language. Now, we sit here today and I can't see any of you. I can't hear any of you. You can't see me as I'm doing a presentation. So there's a very big part already. Of course, this is a webinar, but I'm saying that if you want to kind of be able to work, you can see how much stuff get lost without seeing somebody's mannerism, seeing their body language, seeing, you can hear the tone, you can hear the words, but there's a huge chunk that gets missed as well. And that, so in order for you to be able to make sure that you can then be able to adjust, because you've lost a particular part of the body language, how do you then make sure that the voice and the tone that you carry actually try and assist and make sure that your message is clear across as well? So we're looking at the communication process. So we say there's a source of the information, then there's a message that I'm sending it through, either through by calling somebody or by writing. And then what channel am I using? Am I writing? Am I making a phone call? Or am I working on doing face-to-face? So when the receiver listens to me when I'm talking to them about how much money they owe and what they need to pay, this is the receiver. So they need to be able to be given the opportunity to decode the message. And what sometimes will happen when I come to them very quickly and I'm already kind of like, I need them to make the payment. I need them to happen now. So I want to kind of be able to give them the information without giving them the chance to be able to receive, digest, and be able to give feedback. It does not mean that they have to have days, but they need to kind of just really take it in before they can give me feedback. And sometimes we go there and we already have, or I make a call, not physically, but I make a call and I already have got very clear expectations of what is it I want to try and do. So once again, it comes to allow somebody, in order to have an effective communication, allow somebody to take and hear what you're saying, give them an opportunity to express about what is the reason, what is the challenge. And then you'll be able to gauge as well whether you think that is actually authentic, sincere, kind of like, feedback they're giving you or not. So, the most basic of all human being needs is the need to understand and to be understood. The best way to understand people is to listen to them. Now, that's rough, Nichols. So it's really important. It's once again, it's something that is so simple and yet so impactful. The most basic of all human needs, not just one of, but it's the most basic. It's a fundamental, is the need to understand and to be understood. Because if you understand people, it's about listening to them. If somebody says, can you just hear my point of view? Can you hear why? Not what you think why, but so you can hear my side as well. Whether no matter whether you think it is real, whether you think it is authentic, but this is my story, and I would like you to give me an opportunity as a receiver to give you feedback as well. So that's quite crucial. And then one of the amazing part is that we start as human being. So the parts, it says the most important basic of all human needs is a need. So all humans. So we start here before we becoming, working as sheriffs or working as collectors. We start by just being ourselves. And if we understand what our values are, our own values, if you understand what our ethics are, then when we go and work with people, we don't change and chop and change our ethics, our values purely based on I'm interacting with so and so today, and then tomorrow I'm going to change them something else. No, those become the foundation that makes you who you are today. So based on those values that you have, and just to kind of give you an example, I have had an amazing time where when I work with a lot of people, and I'll ask them to say, can you maybe just share with me? And because when you ask them to articulate the business kind of values and principle, they'll tell you what the business's values are. So then I come around and I said, okay, well, can you maybe share what are your own personal values? Maybe give me one or two of those. And you find that people, they really struggle to be able to articulate clear what are actually their values. Because if you understand your values and your ethics, not only the principles are rational, principles are like your code of kind of operation, they're like your SOP, but your ethics, which is not tangible, your value, which is actually a grounding, which becomes your reservoir of everything that you do, which is actually the makeup of who you are today. And I think that is really important. So then you ask and says, can you maybe articulate that? Can you just share with me on that? Then they struggle. So let's look at this as well. So honesty. So somebody they also they'll say that I want somebody to be honest and I am an honest person. And then you say, okay, unpack a little bit more. What do you mean by that? So while I'm doing this, I would like to think of that. Just write them down as well, and maybe put your own values as well on the side and say, what do you believe your own values are? One or two or three as well, and the ethics. The other one is a diligent and competence. Okay, competence and diligence. So when you know that when you gotta do something, you gotta do it right, you gotta do it properly, you gotta do it professionally. So, and make sure that you are also skilled to do something, that you are equipped to be able to do that as well, and you have the right tools and you have the knowledge that is required. We're moving on to dignity and trust. So if I go and work with a collector, if I go and begin a negotiation, which is a promise to pay with a debtor, it's important that there is a build of trust, that I come there, that is a sense of dignity, that I don't kind of come and belittle them and make them feel small about who they are and why they have not made a payment. And if they don't do this, and give them all the repercussions of what will happen should they not make the payment. But if I treat them with dignity, then necessarily without any kind of like issues, you'll find that there will be trust that gets built there because they know, once again, that you listen to them, you heard them, you have the empathy to be able to understand their side of the story. Even though that they know that they are liable to make the payment, they have to be able to do that. But it's about you, your approach, about how you work with them. So once again, the conflict of interest. What do you mean by that? You gotta know that if something is not going to be able to work well because you have a vested interest or a vested kind of like, interest with somebody. You got to kind of be honest enough and says, I cannot handle, I cannot go to down the road because in that house there, that's where my family, that's where my parents, that's where my kind of in-laws live. So what I will do, that is a conflict of interest. So what I would like to do is then to get somebody else from the team to be able to go and assist. So there could be different reasons. And this is, once again, it's not only there are 4 ethics, but I want just to, I'm pinpointing a few of them. And hopefully while I'm doing this, you are also kind of writing them down somewhere along your side to see, okay, what could be actually my ways and stuff. And maybe, as I said earlier on, it's a reminder for you to look at what are the things that maybe from having been in the space for so long, I have almost forgotten. And then here's this guy coming to be able to remind me about them as well. Because it's going back to basics. It's going back to basics that I need to remember I'm dealing with human being. It doesn't really matter about where I am and who they are, but ultimately I start and treat them just like human beings. So let's move on. What I'd like us to look at quickly are the different legislation that governs the debt collection. Now, there's plenty of them, and we're going to do a quick high level of naming them. We can't go deeply, but there are 2 very specific ones that I would like to kind of have a look at them. So one of them is a Debt Collectors Act, which is 114 of 1988. Then there's a National Credit Act, and then we have the Magistrate Court Act. Then we have a Prescription Act, which a lot of times you are aware that people now, the public is very much aware of the Prescription Act, because what it does, it will tell them to say, where we also have to educate them about, well, if the debt has been X amount for X amount of years, for over 3 years, for example, that then you can actually kind of claim prescription, because then your debt might be prescribed, depending, of course, where we have not tacitly or expressively kind of admitted that you do have the debt with that kind of like, provider. Then there's a High Court Act, and then we have the Consumer Protection Act. Now, once again, this is a very big one. All of these are very important, but I'm mentioning the ones that are quite familiar with us as well. And you're looking at Matrimonial Property Act, and then the South African Constitution, the Law of Cession, the Close Corporation Act, the Companies Act, and the Law of Contract. So looking at all of these, and I'm certain that there are a host of other acts as well that I have not mentioned, but these ones, they almost the backbone of governing the debt collections kind of industry, because we pull from one to another, and you'll see that when you go into the next one. So the Debt Collectors Act 114 of 1998, the main objective is to transform the debt collection system in South Africa by monitoring the conduct and professionalism of debt collectors and promoting a culture of good governance within the profession, thus contributing to protecting the public at large as well as creditors. It's about making sure that it monitors how we conduct ourselves as sheriffs, how we conduct ourselves as collectors, and making sure that there's always a professionalism of us as collectors and debt, and as well as sheriff, in promoting a culture of good governance. Now, that is quite a mouthful to think about it, because it monitors to make sure that we don't deviate from that. It monitors to make sure that we uphold the level of professionalism. It makes sure to make sure that there is a promotion. So we do a few things. We've been monitored, but there's a conduct way of handling as a professionalism. But the next one is about constantly promoting a culture of good governance. We say, as sheriffs or as collectors, as debt collectors, that our main part when you're working with debtors is that we are there as their financial advisors. We're there to support them to understand the importance of being able to make the payments to move forward, as opposed to showing them that what would be the repercussions of them not making this. So we use a positive spin to be able to educate them, to be able to make sure that they understand what is the benefit. There has to be a value in them making the payment that actually is more, that carries more weight to them not making the payment. And I think this is quite important. So we look at the importance of Section 36 and 37 of the Sheriff's Act 90 of 1986. Now, I'm almost certain, or not I'm almost, I am certain that all of you have had an opportunity to go through this act, because before you obviously can work as a sheriff, you have to fully understood and fully understand about how the act works. Now, what I'm doing here, I'm really just encapsulating and taking the two sections of the act, and just like as a reminder again, once again, the importance of those two sections is a section 36 and section 37 of the act. Now, you might have seen this, and I know you have seen it before. So let's look at what does it really say. It looks at a few things. Claims against the fund. It says a claim against a fund in respect of contingency referred to in section 35 may be lodged with the board on the prescription form. Subject to the provision of the subsection 3, no person shall have a claim against the fund in respect of a contingency referred to in section 35 unless the claimant lodges his claim with the board in terms of subsection 1 within 3 months after he became aware of the contingency, or the claimant furnishes the board with 6 months after written demand was sent to him by the board, with such proof in verification of his claim as the board may reasonably require. If the board admits a claim against a fund, the board shall pay out the fund such compensation as may be agreed upon by the board and the claimant. Any dispute relating to the amount of compensation to be paid out of the fund shall be settled by the arbitration in accordance with the Arbitration Act 1965. So this is on the specifically of section 36 of the Act, which you're, once again, you're already familiar with it. But once again, is to try and kind of just like, revisit this as a reminder in terms of how and when you claim the funds and what is it that sits within that space as well. So let's look at section 37 that says actions against the board in respect of funds. If the board refuses to admit a claim against the fund, the claimant may, subject to the section of section 38, institute an action against the board in respect of the fund in the court within the area of jurisdiction of which the course of action arose. An action against the board in respect of the fund shall not be instituted without leave of the board unless the claimant has exhausted all available legal remedies against the sheriff or deputy sheriff in respect of whom the claim arose, or his estate, and against all other persons liable in respect of the loss or damage suffered by the claimant. So, if you want to take action against the board in respect of the fund, and in any action against the board in respect of the fund, the board may raise any defense which could have been raised by the sheriff or deputy sheriff in respect of whom the claim arose. Now, let's look at the improper conduct of the Sheriff's Act. So this is subsection 43 to 52. Once again, I am probably aware that I'm confident that you are very familiar with this section, and we are doing a recap as a quick overview and as a reminder for everybody to say, this is where we are and these are the most important parts. The entire act is important, but there are specific actions, or rather sections, that you need to try and work with. So a sheriff shall be guilty of improper conduct if he is negligent or dilatory in the service or execution of any process. He makes a false return in respect of the service or execution of any process. He demands payment of more than the fees or expenses prescribed by or under any law. He contravenes or fails to comply with the provision of the Code of Conduct referred to in section 16. He fails to take all reasonable steps to prevent his deputy sheriff from committing a deed of improper conduct as contemplated in paragraph A, B, C, or D. He commits a deed of insolvency referred to in section 8 of the Insolvency Act 1936. He or she commits an offense in terms of this act or any other offense in respect of which violence, dishonesty, extortion, or intimidation is an element. So a sheriff shall be guilty of improper conduct if he or she makes use of fraudulent or misleading representation, including the simulation of legal procedures, the use of simulated official or legal documents, representation as a police officer, or the making of unjustified threats to enforce rights, or he or she fails to comply with any regulations pertaining to the service of process. So we have now did a very quick reminder of looking at the sheriff's code of conduct or improper conduct. But what I would like us to do is to compare that with what does then the debt collector's code of conduct say. And hopefully you'll find some similarities because both of these individuals or entities, they go and deal with debtors. So it's a finding a way. And once again, so law, legislation, and acts are there to make sure that they do two things, that they make sure that they promote, okay, the spirit of good governance, but they make sure they help us to understand about how to deal and what are the rights and what are the responsibilities of both me as a sheriff, of both me as a collector, as well as the public and the somebody that I'm dealing with. So the code of conduct offers the following. It offers the protection to both the customer and you as a debt collector. So now this is a debt collector. So once again, I've requested that while I'm going through this, please kind of like, cap about what you just covered in relation to the Sheriff's Act and the sections and the code of conduct. Provides you as a debt collector with a clear set of guidelines on how to conduct collections in a manner which is acceptable in the industry and protection to the customer from unscrupulous collection practices. Now, the debt collector is guilty of misconduct when he or she uses force or threatens the use of force against a debtor, acts towards a debtor in an excessive or intimidating manner, makes use of fraudulent or misleading representation, including is convicted of an offense on which violence, dishonesty, extortion, or intimidation is an element, spreads or threatens to spread the false information concerning the creditworthiness of the debtor, contravenes or fails to comply with the provision of the code of conduct contemplated in section 14 of the Act. Now, you can already see clear similarities between these two acts. The DCA, which is the Debt Collectors Act, as well as the Sheriff's Act, when it looks at what happens when it looks at the misconduct of either the sheriff or the debtor. So when you are a sheriff and you're doing debt collection, which means you are using two acts to be able to assist you in being able to work with that. And you got to make sure that there's a compliance with both those acts by looking at the similarities. That also he behaves or acts in a manner amounting to conduct other than that mentioned in paragraphs above, which is improper in terms of a regulation. So they are very closely related because they are legislation, which governs you about how you operate, how you work with everybody around as well. So I would like us to move on now. What would be the prohibited methods of collection? We know this, and I'm certain that in a lot of kind of classes or sessions you've attended, that this has been mentioned a few times. One of them will be withholding the customer's identity document and withholding the customer's credit or debit card with a PIN code in order to withdraw the customer's money owed to the debt collector. So this sounds like something that happened many years ago, but it still does happen sometimes, and you wonder why. And there were times many years ago when people will go into the debtor's home and will kind of threaten and say, I'm gonna do ABC if you don't kind of like, make the payment, or I'm going to expose you. So once again, the act makes sure that it protects the person who's a debtor, but it also makes sure that you as a sheriff or you as a collector, that you abide and make sure you withhold the professional manner of how you conduct with yourself. So as a result of this practice, money was withdrawn from the customer's account without their permission. A credit provider found to be using prohibited methods of collection is guilty of an offense in terms of Section 133 of the National Credit Act. So, and this happened not too long ago. So people still practice this and hope that they're going to get away with it. Now, if we were having a face-to-face session, I would have said, are there any questions you would like me to go forward? So please put those questions later on for us to be able to go to. So let's look at the two things. We look at what is called a soft collection and what is a hard collection. So if we start with a soft collection, we'll look at is a softer approach to collecting debt and is normally aimed to negotiating with the customer. Such process involves working with the customer to determine their level of indebtedness, possibly rescheduling or discounting a payment and making a deal where it becomes a win-win situation. Now, a hard collection, on the other hand, changes. It can be referred to as a seizure and normally takes place after the soft collection. Hard collections involve all measures of debt recovery provided by the law, as well as physically meeting with the customer if needed according to the company policy and procedures. Now, you will know within your own working environment which customers that you need to be able to use a softer collection approach and which ones you need to be using a harder collection approach where I have exhausted all the negotiation processes. I have tried everything else on the other side where you've made promises, but there's been broken promises where you have not been able to follow up. Now, what is the proper process? Not your own version of doing the hard collection, but a proper procedure of what is required by law to be able to work with in terms of being able to then still kind of getting your money being paid into your account that has been owed to you or to your company. Now, what is a debt collection management system? It is a system used by a company or organization which informs, provides the credit controller as soon as the account becomes overdue, and you kind of just work with it. Okay. May include debt collection software and other methods, okay, then an individual must use to collect debt from their debtors. So this is a system that you use. So if I have a lot of clients or I have a lot of debtors, I might have a system. Now, not everybody has got that system. If you're running a small entrepreneurial business, you might not have a system, but you might have some kind of a process or a procedure of how then you use, whether it's a big complicated Excalibur system for debt collection or using any of those, but you can also have a smaller one that just works with you and your kind of like targeted kind of customers as well. Methods of correspondence. We spoke earlier on very briefly about that you can choose about how you communicate. Once again, you communicate in making sure that there is a message and what platform in terms of there is a carrier, and then the receiver receives it and what happens. So I've put down here as an example in terms of as a process that happens before you can then move into between soft and all the way to hard collections. So number one, you proactively contact or call the person, and then you kind of explain. So that's like a start. So they've made an agreement now, they have not been able to honor their payments, or the bond is somehow in arrears for quite a long time. It's past pre-legal. So you are now kind of moved to the stage. So there's a letter of confirming that these people have received. And then also, why am I confirming with the letter is to make sure that they understand what it is that they owe and how much they owe and when they need to be able to pay it by. So that happens between 14 days. And then from there, it is important for me to tell them to say, it needs to be paid by this date, because if I don't mention that, then it becomes an open-ended letter. It has to be said, this is what you owe, and then within this period of time, it needs to be paid. And then failure to do so, then what might be the next step? But this is still a very part at the beginning. Now, I then begin to call. I say, we've made an arrangement, we agree we're going to do this, but there's been 30 days has gone by and there's been no payment. So I would like to know when you're going to make the payment. Can you make the payment tomorrow? Can you make the payment by the end of the week? And what are the reasons why we have not made it? Because you've got to understand about the reasoning when somebody's made the promise. Then the second call of collection, if then kind of passes between, say, 0 to 30 and 32, say, to 45 days or 60 days. And then you then begin to do, now I'm moving more towards a harder kind of collection kind of strategy, where then there's a letter of demand being sent, registered letter. You can't just send a letter that's not registered, because you need to have, once again, the record of the letter was sent and have all the references as well being put into that. And next part, then now the entire process of the soft collection process, it stops, and now the account is placed on hold, and then you begin the legal kind of procedures now from here. You send a final demand letter, and then kind of like from there. Now, I wanted us to look at from each stage what it is and how we are working with the dender. Part one, we say we are very customer service orientated. We identification of the dispute. We've said, okay, this is what it is, and we want to kind of understand why have you not been able to make the payment? Are there issues? How can I assist you? So we're still very much using a very customer service oriented, because ultimately that should kind of carry on all the way across about how. But what we want to understand about, we need to identify the dispute of why have you not been able to make the payment. So in another section, you need to kind of understand once again, once we've called, we now need to obtain a promise to pay. We need to understand to say, I understand you said you have not been able to pay for these reasons. Can I now get a PTP, a promise to pay? And when you're going to do this, and we agree on that. That is now the second stage, which goes from the first call of collection. I then move into the next stage. So I now have made a promise to pay, but they've not made the payment based on their kind of like arrangement. I then call again on my second call. I'm now making a promise to pay as an immediate payment that is required because they have passed the overdue due stage. So I slowly begin to surface dispute. I make additional calls if necessary to make sure that that is actually, if they're going to make tomorrow, I then make sure that I call them to make that payment and ask them to send me a proof of payment as well. If that does not succeed, if I'm not successful on that, now there's an escalation of customer. Decision on further proceedings, apply for demand letter with corporate. So it now, once again, I said, it turns into moving into more legal proceedings by understanding and knowing what you have to do as a collector or as a sheriff. So you don't go from the beginning where somebody has made a promise to pay to then kind of like go and demand and kind of like, throwing. So there has to be a process that you've got to try and follow and work with them all the way as well. So questions, what action, what are the time frames, and what process to follow? This is very critical and very crucial for us, that I understand that once I know that the debt has been handed over and I'm working with it, what is the action that needs to be done? What are the time frames on every single stage? You might need to repeat those, and what process needs to be followed, whether it's a soft kind of collection strategy or is a hard collection of strategy as well. Negotiating a payment, we need to be assertive. We need to ask questions. We need to be active listening. We need to remain positive, and ultimately, we need to negotiate. So when you talk about negotiation, it says negotiation in the simplest form is a process whereby two parties reach an agreement. In any organization, there will always be a need to negotiate. So debt collectors negotiate with customers to settle a difference in the amount to be collected. The smart debt collector will enter the negotiation with a clear strategy in mind. Planning for the negotiation will improve the outcome. It's important that you plan and know. So you have all your facts, all your ducks in a row. What it is that I want to try and achieve, how much they owe, what is actually the history of this client, of this customer, what has been the challenges for them of not being able to pay going forward. Negotiating a PTP. We've already covered this as well. First attempt is 0 to 30 days. If you're looking at the timeline that I showed you, it shows that it goes from 0 from first month to the end of the month, and then it goes from 30 to 60 or 31 days to 60 days. This is your second attempt now on arrears. And your last one is a third attempt of 60 to 90 days in arrears. So it's something that you're going to be able to work with, that you begin from first stage where you are very customer service orientated, and you move along all the way to when you get to the third stage. Now it changes the tone, but once again, it does not change the tone to suit you about how you feel. It changes the tone to say what processes and what procedure legally and lawfully you should be following to be able to move on to the next stage as well. Step in negotiation, prepare for the interaction, present, bargain, closing the discussion. So we covered this a bit earlier on as well about it's about how you prepare, that it starts with you as a person. If I'm gonna go there and wanna interact and speaking at you versus speaking with you, then somebody they're gonna feel that they have not heard the message. So it's important to make sure that you give them an opportunity, you present to them and give them an opportunity to respond, but most importantly, have empathy, understand where they're coming from as well. So the barriers: poor documentation, bad listening behavior, language barrier. So there are a couple of reasons why, sometimes we have a challenge to be able to negotiate effectively. So I'll go and speak to somebody and they are not congruent to be able to fully grasp about what actually am I saying to them, because maybe the language barrier, they're not really kind of clear about what I'm saying. So you got to try and understand about, okay, who is actually my client? And if maybe I know that I'm going to struggle to be able to do, I'll then get somebody, a colleague, to be able to come with me, where they'll be able to assist me to speak to somebody in their vernac so that they can be able to hear me as well. I think that is really, really crucial, because sometimes there's an oversight in that where we don't kind of think it's important, because as long as I go and speak to you in English, and everybody should be able to speak that and should just be able to work with it, or any other language for that matter. So you need to check with somebody in terms of is it okay to be able to work with, because you could lose an opportunity where the frustration from both parties could build up. And yet, if you had kind of just listen and ask somebody else to assist you so you can hear their point. We say that the basic need for a human being is a need to be heard, to be understood. And if somebody feels that you are speaking at them, but not really kind of caring at any given point about what is their point of view, and you can't even hear because you don't care, all you want to do is to show them the figures, then you are almost kind of closing and creating your own stumbling blocks, creating your own issues before you can move forward as well. So just really try and be mindful and bear in mind and make sure that if there's going to be an issue when it comes to the language barrier, or maybe and also when you don't really kind of pay attention, because I can hear somebody speaking, but if you're not really kind of paying attention to clearly listen to them as well, that could be a place of contention at the same time. Okay, so we're moving into handling customers' objections. Now, there's plenty. I'm certain that, this is just, I'm giving you just a very high level, and you definitely have come across probably a lot of kind of customers' objections where some of these might be a bit familiar. And I know that you're already sitting with a bag of customers' objections from your side as well. So let's start with this. Objections off ramps are excuses and methods of trying to avoid paying the debt that some debtors will present to you. And people do that. And it's not because they feel there's different reasons why people feel specifically they need to be able to do that. And some of the off ramps or objections might actually be authentic about of where they are at a particular time. Let's look at one. Unfortunately, the objection might not be a lie sometimes. And I think that it's really crucial for us that if I really pay attention to what the other person is saying, what is their objection? So I don't actually kind of just use a blanket statement or a blanket thinking of generalizing and thinking that everybody who has not made the payment, they are just kind of lying. They are not kind of telling the truth. They're trying to avoid whatever kind of my own perception might be. So, and the debtor might be in a bad situation, and when confronted with an unwelcome telephone call or even just like a face-to-face, their frustrations are let loose. So I think that is quite it's important to know that somebody's already sitting in a very precarious kind of space where they know that they are not in a very good situation. They know that they owe you, they need to be able to pay. And then you come and just like confront them. And their frustrations could then kind of let loose. So this is because having debt creates stress. We all know that. Part of the stress is guilt or humiliation of debt. Nobody wants to be reminded of the debt. Nobody wants to be, reminded, and because it makes you feel guilty, it makes you feel humiliated. And I think that sometimes we also forget that even though we are sheriffs, even though we are debt collectors, we are also consumers. So, which means possibly the majority of us, including myself, that we do have a debt. We do owe somebody something. So we gotta put ourselves, in their shoes and says, okay, well, so if somebody comes and speak to me in this way, and I already know that I have not made the payment on Friday and it was due on Friday, but this is how they're addressing me. How would I actually? I'm gonna try and kind of be able to react on that. So find a way of changing that. Now, we spoke about your own values, we spoke about your own ethics, we spoke about your own kind of way of as a person. What is your makeup? Because if your makeup is very genuine, is very authentic, is very empathetic, is very understanding, is very caring, then you are able to deal and be successful in your collections than somebody who's constantly frustrated because maybe their approach, because sometimes you might find that the approach as well, it's actually what really happens. So you got to try and find a way of how do I then able to work with it. How do I actually be able to work with this as I move forward? How do I able to work with this person if they are struggling with ABC as well? So give them an ear, listen to them. So this is the cycle, the worry cycle. This is the situation. And then you have then the voice, the call, the excessive stress build up, and then there's a behavior, then there's an unhealthy emotion that comes up, and somebody just doesn't want to kind of hear you, or they change numbers and that. So we've already kind of covered that part as well. So let's move on into looking at as an effective collector, one of your tasks will be to help the debtor move past the reason why they cannot pay, understanding the seriousness of the need to pay the debt, and to help them find the solution within their own life to pay the debt. Okay, so this is really important to stress again. We gotta move past. We gotta help the person that owes us, that owes the money, that is indebted. They need to, we need to assist them, that they need to understand the seriousness of the debt, to acknowledge that, and then we need to find a way, a solution. We need to kind of be able to assist and craft a solution. Generally, when somebody is indebted, they emotions surface very, very quickly, which means they're struggling a lot to be able to kind of like rationalize and kind of think outside where they already are in that situation. But our job, if we listen attentively and really kind of pay attention and giving them the space and being empathetic, they will be able to then hear and understand what is the solution we bring forth. Not that all we're interested, that we don't care about what their situation is, all we want to do is to collect. So really keep that in mind. Once again, it comes back to you as a person, in your personality, as your character, and the approach and your behavior and everything else as well. Because if you're gonna go there and all you wanna do, you know what the person owes and what does the legislation say, and that you are not communicating with them. Use what you have, use your soft skills, use your effective communication. You need to use your your negotiation skills. You need to be able to, and I'm almost certain that any one of you sitting in the room wherever you are now, that if you are a very good communicator, but you are a very good listener, and you negotiate very well, that your soft skills in terms of your EQ and your IQ works very well, that you are successful in your business. As somebody who only just want to draw the papers and all want to do is to show you what you owe and then bring up the legislation before anything else, which means they are not even interested in communicating. So in doing this, you have to maintain your composure, No matter how aggressive the debtor becomes, you must comply with the code of conduct of the debt collectors and the collections call structure. So we know that, so for the sheriffs, we have to conduct, obviously, we have to kind of comply with the code of conduct of the Sheriff's Act, including the Debt Collectors Act as well. So that it doesn't really matter. It does not mean that allow somebody to abuse you, it just means that just make sure that you don't fan the flames. You hear, you say, I understand, and I hear what you're feeling, and I can only imagine. So using all the words that might be empathetic, but ultimately you want to find a solution. You want to craft a solution with them and still come up at the end of that call to say, so we have agreed that you've made a promise to pay, about how you're going to go forward and make a promise to pay. And show them the value as well in making the payment. This call is not a personal one. And when the debtor is aggressive with you, it is not personal. Always remain professional, because your parties remain professional. They're not attacking you. They're just full of emotions, and they are frustrated. And you happen to be that person that triggered that part of, it's about me being humiliated. I don't have the money. I'm not. And maybe they even getting that as well from somebody to say that, that they have not been able to pay. And you're not maybe the only company or person who's calling. There's a lot of people. So find a way of constantly working and being professional and still making sure that you're still operating within the scope of the code of conduct of the act as well. How to manage objections. We need to reconfirm the consequence of non-payment. At this point, it will be useful to reinforce the legal consequences of not paying the debt with the debtor, as you will need to move into the negotiation phase, and you will need to try to negotiate and payment arrangement with the debtor. So I've already mentioned this part in the previous slide to say that your part is to assist them. They need to see the value in them making an attempt in making the payment, as opposed to you just only telling them about they've not paid, then this is what's going to happen. These are going to be the repercussions of them not paying. Instead of saying, here, this is what it is. The fact remain that this is how much money you owe. This is what needs to be paid. Let's find a way of solution about how, based on your kind of current cash flow, whether you get it from families, whether you're kind of collecting cash from somewhere else, but let's find a way of how you want to actually be able to then start paying and making an attempt towards that. That is very crucial. So this step is aimed at paying the way to negotiation. So handling debtors, how much. So this is once again where they give you objections. So how much am I overdue on my account? As if they didn't actually even know how much am I making my account. And I have already made a payment and have sent the proof of payment. Why is it not reflecting on your account? So these could be the truth when they're mentioning this, but sometimes it could be a way of trying to avoid you just to get off the phone as you're making the call to say, no, I've already made the payment. I have sent the proof as well. I'm not sure why it's not reflecting. And when you go back and double check, it's like, actually, I thought I was going to make the payment, but I'll do it at the end of the month. So you got to find a way of really kind of like probing about, okay, when was it sent? And maybe they try and resend it to a place where you can be able to figure it out as well without being aggressive. So you got to make sure that your part is to remain assertive, not being aggressive with them. While interacting with the debtor, you need to remain professional. The best way to remain professional when dealing with the debtor is to maintain your decorum, comply with the code of conduct, not getting involved on a personal level. So you want to make sure that you maintain the level of professionalism, of constantly making sure that you don't deviate from that, you don't make it a personal issue, but ultimately you need to comply with the code of conduct. And it's nobody's attacking you directly. They are just frustrated. I'm keep on repeating this as a reminder to say sometimes when people express and say stuff, it might not necessarily kind of address to us. It's a frustration that they're bringing out because we have not kind of like, they need us to hear them, and they are too deep sometimes to really kind of think outside of it because they are kind of stuck with it. So dealing with excuses, I have a cash flow issue problem. The account has already been paid and the check is in the post. If we still use checks in some places as well. Okay, oh, I'm too busy now. When can I call you, ma'am? When can I call you, sir? I'll let you know. I'll call you. You don't need to call me at all. Can I call you tomorrow? Yes, try it this time. And when you call again, they are too busy to do that. So find a way of how you deal with it. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all, everybody, for attending today's session. And I know that we have busy lives. I know we are very busy. And I really want to thank you for attending. And I know that at some point, once we are moving out from these trying times, that potentially we'll be able to maybe do a face-to-face session at some point. Maybe we'll do a face-to-face session at some point. And I would like to thank Andrew Kubeni Komisi for his assistance today with really kind of making sure you pick up all the questions and assisting us, and ultimately to thank the South African Board of Sheriffs for organizing and hosting this event. So thank you. And cheers.
Right. Mr. Ndlovu, Sikensile, thank you very much for a very presentation. I must say I have actually picked up something which I myself was very much reluctant to apply at my office. It was a well-explained presentation. So as I've said, you can see that. Thank you very much. Right, now we are at the Q&A session. We have received some couple of questions, Ms. Ndlovu, and then I will start with the first one from E. Kamini. She is saying, it is in the nature of our work that on a monthly basis, we send to our clients, who are in the majority attorneys, statements of monies owed to us, but they just ignore our correspondence. Now, I think Mr. Min will also bear with me. I think she posted the question whilst we were busy explaining the DS, or the days that are allowed to make follow-ups. But maybe if you have something that you can maybe share with or respond to her question by all means. So in essence, she is saying that we deal with attorneys and we send month-to-month statements, but unfortunately, it seems like we are not getting the benefit of that exercise. So do you have anything maybe that you want to share?
Thank you very much, Andrew. And just to say thank you so much for the question as well. I like the fact that you are sending a month-to-month kind of statements to the attorneys. And I can definitely say that maybe the other approach as well is picking up the call. So we looked at the communication as a process. So the actual kind of like, correspondence is a method of communicating, but it's not always the most effective way of communicating as well. So you need to kind of supplement that with just making a call and follow up. And when somebody sometimes hear your voice and say, hi, this is Sensei calling, I'm just kind of following up that I've sent an email through and just follow up on that. Because if I'm only just sending communication, I'm dealing with them as if they were a system. I'm dealing with them as if they were not a human being. And sometimes the attorneys or anybody else, they want to know that you've sent the stuff, but you need to follow up by saying, okay, well, I've sent the stuff. I'm just following up to check you received it and thank you very much. By them hearing the tone of your voice and hearing what you sound like, they might have a different impact than just a document being sent through. I hope that answers your question.
Back to the questions, Mr. Ndlovu. I have another one from Mzimela AM. Okay, this is quite a tricky one, but I will present it to you. Maybe you might assist. Mzimela is saying, is there any legislation that prevents me, I presume Mzimela is a sheriff, from denying an old data of any services that Mzimela is rendering as a sheriff, especially if Mzimela has exhausted all the avenues of getting the outstanding debts paid. Can you try that one?
Thank you once again. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for the question. It's definitely a very tricky one, but just to look at it. So for me, there are support systems. So And the support systems will be the different stages of legislation or law or involvement within the court of law. So if I've tried a lot of stuff personally and I feel that I have not been able to be successful, so that will naturally have to move into a space that is obviously kind of being addressed by the court of law about what is the next step from there. Because I believe that there isn't anybody who is actually above the law. So, and maybe, yes, in your own personal capacity, you might have kind of exhausted and tried everything else, but there needs to be proper kind of steps that needs to be taken in terms of the proper legislation and the law that's going to be able to govern. As far as whether you are able to then stop and not provide any services to somebody because of the unpaid debt, which is long overdue, I'm just not certain if your role as a sheriff, you are a service provider, you are supposed to be kind of helping it. So ultimately, even in my presentation, I was talking a lot about being able to assist the debtors, being able to constantly let them see a way through then whatever kind of like, cloud that there might be there. So maybe to go back, just to revisit and kind of say, let us have a look at this and see what the issue is. I hear that you say you've not been able to pay. Let us try together and craft a solution. And if that has been attempted and still nothing really happens, where to from here? How do we then move where I can take it to the next stage? And also just like really, I think reinforcing the consequences of non-payment and where they sit as a person and what will happen from there. Not because you're creating your own rules, but it's because of the court on law, this needs to be happening going forward. I think it's crucial to do that. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Ndlovu. So in essence, we as the service providers, we also have to acquaint ourselves with the relevant legislation that is applicable and available to our disposal. I understand and take that. I also hope that Zemela is also amenable to or accepting your response to the question. Right. Questions are pouring in. Thank you very much to all the attendees. Mr. Ndlovu, another one from Itumeleng Seboka. Ms. Seboka is asking, for how long do you negotiate for a PTP? And when do you aim for a signed AOD? I presume AOD is acknowledgement of debt. Debtors always are reluctant to sign the AODs. Can you please respond to that?
So just to, thank you, Andrew, and thank you for the question. There was one section which I covered that looks specifically at the negotiation process with the data, where it says you have the first stage where you had the pen and the timeline. So it had from 0 to 30 days, where it was an initial phase where you're kind of negotiating, and then failure to do that when somebody has not kind of like, made the payment, where there's been a broken PTP, which then runs from 31 days to 60 days. That becomes a secondary kind of PTP. So if I've made an arrangement with Sensei and he has not been able to pay, so when I make the next arrangement, I then need to make sure that I now request not now a 30-day kind of payment process, are then now requesting for a promise to pay as an immediately. And if they are unable to pay for whatever reason, then there has to kind of like be a commitment from the other party that says, this is when, since I can't do it now, this is when I would like to do it. So law or the legislation says follow very specific guidelines. That's why it goes from 0 to 30, from 31 to 60, from 60 to 90, 61 to 90 days. So it's a 3-month process and you have to work with that. And sometimes, because if you're also dealing with people who understand legislation, who understand the law, they know that they are actually within their right in terms of being able to, some of them will be able to work with, but somebody knows that if I have not paid you in 30 days, there's going to be a 60-day period, there's going to be a 90-day period. And then from there, then you can move on into the hard kind of like, collection kind of strategy, where now the legislation begins to come on board as well. So I know that you might have a challenge, but just know that they are sometimes feeling they're actually exercising their own rights. And then once again, maybe let's try and use a different approach. If you have not tried that, see if you can pick up the call, and because I find that sometimes if we were frustrated as well, we don't want to deal with people on face-to-face or making calls. We want to just send the documentation and let them know. They feel that and treat that as a document. It's just a system. So I need you to tell me and pick up the call and say, Sensei, I have sent them stuff. I'm just following up. I know this has happened, but they will hear your tone. They might even be able to see you because they will know you are also following up as well. Let us not forget to use the most important part, which is an asset, which is us as human being, to be able to pick up the call and they can hear the tone of the voice. You are not frustrated, but you are being professional as well. I hope that answers your question.
We as the sheriffs, we are not registered as credit providers. Now, are there any consequences, or are there any consequences of this for the recovery of the non-payments of our accounts? Further to that, we don't have anything, I'm subject to be corrected, but we don't have any regulation that requires us to register with the FSB, Financial Services Board. Now,
Okay, good. So maybe this might be, I believe you, if you could assist me here, because once again, this is on business to business, this is on entity to entity. So maybe from where you sit, from the board of sheriffs, that maybe you can be able to assist the question. Just help me here, because I think that, if they say there is no legislation, there is no kind of like, something quite specific as that, then maybe there might be a procedure or a process that is also acceptable from the organization itself. So I'm just not sure how does that tie with how you then work, I think, as a board of sheriffs from your side. Maybe you can help me with that as well.
okay. Mr. Ndovu, I think for the sake of not deviating and or not misleading our participants and our
Yes.
fellow colleagues, there are some couple of comments which have also been raised in the Q&A sessions. Some are also adding to the questions, or some are also adding to the answers to the questions that we have given. Now, I think, to be honest with you, it's our profession, as far as I know, we don't have a specific rule or regulation that says we must register. But as I've said, I'm not entirely speaking on behalf of the profession or on behalf of the board. I'm just responding to as far as my knowledge is concerned. So I don't ever recall coming across a requirement that we need to register because of our appointment. We are appointed by the Department of Justice in line with the approval and the recommendation from the board. So to be honest with you, I think for that one, maybe if you can bank it, and then my team of the training and development might also collaborate all the other submissions that have been made to add to your answers and also to this type of questions to try to get a unified and a correct response so that we don't mislead our fellow colleagues and the profession. I believe we are also in the midst of attendance of experienced and well-informed sheriffs. If I may, Mr. Alan Murugan, I think he is also part of this session. And then he's also the chair of the committee that I'm sitting in. I think he will concur with me if I say some of the questions, I think we just have to bank so that when we give an answer to the profession, we give a precise and a correct answer to that. So for now, I think let's just bank it and then concentrate on our presentation per se. Yeah? And I hope the members or the attendees are not gonna crucify me for that deviation. Right, moving right along. All right. Okay, Ms. Lipadi is also posting a question. Okay, can I just quickly run through it quick? Okay, Ms. Lipadi is asking, what is the connection between Section 36 and Section 37 regarding debt collection by the sheriffs? I think she's posting it because of we have addressed it in your presentation. Do you mind to respond to that? The connection between the Section 36 and 37?
Thank you for the question. The most important thing when you look at the section 36 and section 37 was more to look at the profession as a sheriff and as a reminder to within the Sheriff's Act to say these are some areas that are quite critical in terms of we want to make a claim to the fund, and in terms of, and the other one was to look at the what is the process as a reminder. So everything is written on the act, and I did kind of like confidently and emphatically mention that I believe that everyone would have gone through the entire act to have a full understanding and a full disclosure or ask questions how it works. But like any other act, there might be some kind of prevalent kind of areas where one needs to relook at it and just kind of like, revisit, not to change or amend, but to remind people for specific areas. So section 36 and 37 looks at what is the process and what happens when you're making a claim to the fund, and what are your rights and what are your responsibilities, and what could be the outcomes as well based on you as a claimant making a claim, and also then the outcome from the Board of Sheriffs as well. That it covers specifically that area there. And then we move into the code of conduct of the improper conduct. But I think that the gravity or the comprehension of the entire kind of act or that area, I'll really encourage for, for everybody to really to go back. If you have not really looked at the act for quite a long time, just go back and revisit. It really helps you to, once again, to remind it about how do I actually need to operate as a sheriff or as a collector when I go out there. It was more to highlight the importance when you want to make a claim as a sheriff. Because maybe there's been some instances as well where the claim has been made, but you find that somebody is not even aware about what are the processes and what could be the potential outcomes, and that one needs to look at. I hope that answers.
Thank you very much. This one, I think, is quite. I think this one it's within your professional capacity. Must the sheriffs register with FICA? What is your take on that?
If the sheriff is running thank you for the question. If the sheriff is running a business and they're doing transactions with anybody as any other business, as an entrepreneur or a business owner, I would say there is a need, because you're dealing with funds, you're dealing with, and I'm not sure if maybe, because sometimes FICA as a word as well is used very loosely. And I just need to kind of just be very kind of be mindful about maybe what is the question addressing to, because as a personal person, if I want to go and get money to the bank will call me and say, we need to kind of some FICA documents. Does that only mean that they need my ID documents as well as, the water and rates kind of documentation? That could be that. But if I'm now running a business, what am a FICA document as an entity? So if maybe the question is addressing just as a sheriff on a personal individual or as a business, I think one will have to kind of really look at that as well. Because in my personal capacity, the bank or any institution will then require for me to bring those documents. But as a business, I might need to, depending as well, what do I actually need to use it for? I'm not sure if that answers the question correctly, clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe just to add on that, I think we as the sheriff are, from time to time, we do hold auctions. And I think one of the requirements from the consumer protection is that we must be FICA compliant by requesting from the attendees or potential buyers to comply with the FICA requirements. But okay, thank you for the response. I also have a question from Mr. Murugan. It reads as, can any section of the Consumer Protection Act be applied in tandem with the Debt Collectors Act in collection of the monies owing?
And the answer is, thank you, Andrew. And the answer is yes, absolutely. So maybe also for the sake of the learner guide, maybe I might just highlight some areas of the Consumer Protection Act, and then kind of add it there as an addendum, not to the slide, similar to those questions that we asked earlier on for the samples of the letters. then maybe I could maybe just highlight an area of the Consumer Protection Act and just show about how that links into the Debt Collectors Act as well, and for debtors. Maybe if maybe that might actually assist anybody.
Okay, thank you for that. As I've advised previously regarding the issue or the questions regarding registration with the FSB, I've indicated that we as the board, we need to sit down and do our own investigations because of that is a burning question, that is a burning issue, which is which is affecting their profession. So some of the questions which are coming in, I have noted them, and I think they also fall or must be linked within the very same approach that we as the board will have to take in order to can respond collectively and correctly so to the profession, because we don't want a situation whereby we are misleading the profession. So we will have to make a way to try to respond to such issues and questions in due course. Right, Mr. Mduvu is being asked that can we ask for payment in advance for services if the data is still in arrears? Did you get that, sir?
Thank you, Andrew. I got the question. So just so I'm gonna just repeat the question just to make sure that I'm hearing it clearly. So they want to know if they could ask for advance payment from the debtor prior to them rendering the service.
Especially if the data is in arrears. Yeah, especially if the debtor's account is in arrears.
I am not certain. Hi, sorry. I am not certain if there is a legislation that supports or kind of like, support the advance payment before rendering of service. So because you can't even generate an invoice of and be paid for the work we haven't done. There might be an agreement between a sheriff and maybe with a kind of a debtor where they might say, let's look at potentially either a percentage of you could pay before I do the work. There could be, once again, it boils down, it might be just quite specifically to say, do we maybe do a 5% deposit or whatever it is, but I'm not sure if an entire lump sum might actually be, paid upfront for somebody before rendering service. So this, I'm not really certain about what does each business will operate and how will that actually, of course, be legally be acceptable as well within the, because when you're dealing with SARS about the money's being paid before you go and do the job, I mean, how is it going to tell you? But once again, it's something that needs to be negotiated, maybe between the sheriff as well as, the debtor. It's business dependent, I think. So I would like to say that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Novu. Richard is also asking, can we as a sheriff charge interest on outstanding amount?
I must say I like these questions, and I can hear more and more as they're coming that they are definitely pointing more towards the business structure of a sheriff as opposed to the individual. And I think that maybe, maybe that's something for me to kind of like at some point, maybe to engage, at some point, maybe outside here with the team, just kind of look in terms of like, the structures of that. I know it was mentioned as well, but unless you are registered and unless there is a particular way, like, one of the acts that requires for all of that stuff, if you're running as an entity, it's different. But if you're running as an individual, there might be areas where you can't really tap into. So there has to be, if it's a fully fledged business, then you should have all, because what they're mentioning was the FICA document, the FSB document, they're going to mention the Prescription Act document, they're going to mention the percentage commission charge and that. And those things will tally into a fully fledged business that you are running as well. And you mentioned as well, sometimes when you're doing an auction, do you run it as an auction on your own personal capacity or as a business? So I think a lot of those questions will definitely, as you said, let's not mislead by just giving outright answers, but rather kind of like, go back to the drawing board and look at the questions and then unpack them even more as well, so that you can give very clear, accurate answers.
All right, I'd like to reiterate to the profession that we do note your submissions, and as I've said, we as the board and especially my portfolio, we will go through it and then respond to the profession in a collective and a unified manner so that we don't mislead the profession. All right, Mr. Nduvu, for now, I think we can bank any other statements and or submissions for our internal use for us to respond to the profession. So I'd like to say to Sikensire, and thank you very much. And I hope you will be available to maybe take further questions should they arise from the profession. But I'd like to thank you very much for your time and for the presentation. I now hand over to, okay. I now hand over to Jody, if I'm not wrong. Is it you, Jody?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Sensei, for a fantastic and informative session and for batting some really tough questions. I wouldn't want to be in your seat after such an intense session. So thank you very much. So from our side, as the South African Board for Sheriffs, this was the second last masterclass in the series of financial management masterclasses. And on the 5th of February, we will be hosting the final insert called Maximizing Your Income. And who doesn't want to maximize their income? So please be sure to register. Amongst the panelists, we've invited Taxing Master, the CCMA and magistrates. So let's see who comes, and we'd like to see you there. To round up the session, I want to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of you, the participants, for attending today's session, because without you, these sessions would not be possible. I'd like to thank again Sensei Ndlovu, our facilitator, our moderator, Andrew Nkumisi, the members of the board who are present here today from the South African Board for Sheriffs, members of the training committee, as well as the IT team who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to manage this process and to manage us in the process. And finally, the staff from the South African Board for Sheriffs. A big thank you to all of you. Have a fantastic day further, and please stay safe.